It was the gecko who came up with an idea to solve their food problem. He suggested a big toad fishing game where he would be the bait. Wussan didn't want to agree to this at first, because it was too dangerous, and he didn't want to lose his dog. But the gecko persistently convinced him that everything would be fine as long as he had some thorny seeds with him to help him. Taking a few thorns with him, he confidently went hunting, ignoring the flower's warnings to be careful and not to show off. Wussan looked at the bug-eating little girl and thought about what a difficult task it was to raise a child. Now he finally understood the hard work of his mother who raised him by herself. Her dishes was always the most delicious in the world for him. After a while the gecko returned, and not by himself. He barely escaped from his pursuers. Our flower was surprised that he came back so soon. And he brought not a toad, but aggressive and dangerous wasps. A whole swarm of wasps that buzzed frighteningly in pursuit of the intruder. It turned out that the gecko had figured out an ingenious way to get a bunch of food quickly and threw barbs into the wasp's nest, causing them to chase after him. He was lucky that he was able to get to his defender in time, otherwise his skin would have been like a sieve. Now it was Wussan's turn to show the wasps what his improved barbed whips could do. The wasps seemed to be serious and rushed to attack without delay. However, Wussan had already prepared a surprise for them and met them with a hail of spiky conurs. Days of practice had not gone to waste, and now he could hit one wasp after another with enviable accuracy. The wasps fell to the ground, and there was already a heap of them. But this did not stop the wasps, and despite the death of their fellow wasps, they rushed forward. Gradually, Wussan ran out of all the barbed ammunition that he had been accumulating for weeks. This was not a big deal as it was not his main weapon, but merely his first line of defense. He had already prepared his spiky whips for the wasps coming closer. And when the wasps flew closer, he released his spikes with all his fury, making a kebab of all the remaining wasps at once. After a couple more minutes of battle, the last wasps were defeated and Wussan could now breathe a sigh of relief. It was finally over and a large pile of dead wasps had formed in front of him, which should be enough for the baby dragoness for the time being. The gecko and the baby dragoness came out of their hiding place, happy that they had such a strong and reliable guardian. The baby dragoness ran to him, shouting happily that her daddy is the best. They stared questioningly at the battlefield littered with wasp corpses. Seeing their indecision, Wussan advised them to collect the wasps and its thorny seeds. He was sure that these wasps would be enough for the little one for a few days. Gecko went to collect first, and the little one wanted to help him too. After a while, they were able to collect a large pile of wasps, and even Wussan couldn't stop marveling at how many wasps there were. At last, they could eat as much as they wanted. And now the role of a father didn't seem so difficult for him anymore. The bonus to all of this was the many chests Wussan received. And surprisingly, even Ruhua didn't seem so ugly anymore. Though why am I lying? He's actually hopelessly ugly as always. After a while, seeing the little girl eating bugs non-stop, Wussan thought that having their daughter grow up eating bugs all day long wasn't normal. They should have gotten some meat and fed her properly. Gecko was of the same opinion. In order to get meat, they applied their already mastered style of hunting with the use of live bait. A few hours later, the gecko found their future lunch. This lunch was pretty big and hangry itself, so it immediately started chasing Gecko and trying to get him with its tongue. The unsuspecting toad stalked the gecko, catching up to him with its leaps. But he skillfully played the role of the victim and gradually led it into the trap. And when the toad was about to catch up with him, he suddenly turned to it and shot it with an imaginary gun. The toad, who was already hoping to swallow such an impudent gecko, did not even notice the green lightning bolts that were approaching it. It didn't even have time to squawk when the barbed whips bounded in a dead grip. And with one swift impudent Wussan ended her suffering and black toad blood splattered in all directions, and her dead body hung helplessly among the thorns. With a few quick movements of the whips, the toad carcass fell to the ground with a thud. Wussan was happy that he had defeated the toad so easily, and now they would have a meat for dinner instead of the bugs. The new suffocating power of his whips also delighted him, as it would allow him to defeat opponents more serious than toads and snakes. They wasted no further time and immediately began to cut and slice the carcass. Little Yellow especially distinguished himself by the speed of his movements. Toad fillets flew in all directions. The little dragoness devoured it all with an enviable appetite. Piece after piece disappeared into her, and Wu-sun began to think that he would never be able to feed her enough. Days passed, and every day the gecko brought him new victims, which he killed with his whips. The opponents were different, sometimes toads, sometimes snakes. But every time to bring them, the gecko walked on thin ice and risked his life. It was enough for him to make one mistake and everything would be over for him. This fact bothered our hero very much, and he did not want this to continue. In addition, the little girl was growing very fast, and in a month reached the size of a 5-year-old child. With her restless appetite, these small animals were no longer enough to fill her stomach. Finishing another toad, Wu-sun thought that he should find a way to catch larger animals, but their size should be such that he could overpower them. It was not an easy task for him to solve. And he had an idea. When the gecko stared at him questioningly, not understanding what he was doing, instead of putting the toad on the ground to cut it up, he picked it up and started to carry it somewhere. Wu soon explained to him that he wanted to use the toad carcass to attract bigger prey. Finally, Toad fell from his merciless whips and took its breath away. And indeed, a few hours later, its corpse attracted the attention of a new member of the local fauna, who, smelling the smell of blood and dead flesh, could not miss such an opportunity. It was a black rat who was tempted by dreams of fried toad and could not resist to taste it. Unsuspecting, the rat sank its teeth into the corpse, and even started to pull it away into the bushes. But suddenly, thanks to its instincts, it sensed the danger and trembled with tension, trying to pull its teeth out of the unfortunate toad. However, it was too late, and the barbed whips were already closing in on the rat that had taken the bait. When it was finally able to free its teeth and jump aside, it still wasn't enough to save it. The flower's spiky whips had it securely entangled, cutting off any possible escape attempts. The rat tried to bite the vine and tear it with its clawed paws, but despite its best efforts, it failed. And Wu-sun was able to easily lift it into the air, where the rat gave a shrill squeak. But that squeak was the last of its life, as revenge for daring to bite the vine caught up with it instantly, and he slammed it to the ground several times with force, kicking up dust. And now they had 2 carcasses at once, and the gecko didn't even have to risk his own hide for them. They were having a celebration. Wu-sun even thought that today he would definitely be able to feed his little daughter properly. As it turned out, their joy was premature and a sound from the sky caught their attention, scaring them. An eagle was flying straight at them with its wings spread wide. Before they could react, it had grabbed the rat. They were shocked and just followed its movement with a glance. When Wu-sun came to his senses, it was too late and he could only shout curses at the insolent thief. There was no limit to his outrage. How dare this overgrown chicken steal his food? He would definitely take revenge on this. Wu-sun couldn't contain his anger, and he wasn't going to forgive this insolent overgrown chicken for stealing his prey. He shouted at the flying eagle to come back, damn it. Simultaneously trying to hit it with barbs, hurling them one after another. His spiky ammunition raced toward its target at lightning speed. It seemed as if the villain was about to receive a just punishment and his chicken ass would be slapped. But the eagle was too high and only mockingly looked at his pathetic attempts and spikes, which simply did not reach him. He was quite pleased with himself. Taking the prey from another weakling was a very successful move for him. Besides, what could these pathetic ground creatures without wings do to him? This only made Wu-sun angrier, but he couldn't do anything about it. He had already realized that the eagle was too high, but his powerlessness only made him more annoyed. But what happened next surprised our hero even more, and the eagle was pushed to the background. The little dragoness, having seen the example of her so-called daddy, decided to copy him. She too started waving her arms angrily and shouting, "Bad eagle?" Wu-sun looked at her pathetic attempts and advised her to stop because the eagle had already flown away, and she was only shaking the air in vain. But she was a naughty little girl, and not at all ordinary, so she managed to surprise her daddy. She continued to run screaming what a bad rascal that eagle was, and at the same time she began to glow with a bright golden light. It seemed like an epic transformation was about to begin. And so it did. That little ball of fury began its transformation into something more intimidating than a cute little dragon girl. In a moment, she was transformed into a true white dragon who, although small in size, was determined to chase down that eagle who dared to steal their food. Our flower and gecko's jaw dropped from such a transformation because they simply could not believe that in front of them was a real dragon, and she looked just like the dragon that had killed those two strangers. Now Wusun was beginning to worry about his own skin. The newly minted dragon had already accelerated and pushed from the ground. However, instead of flying majestically, something was wrong. The dragoness could not control its wings and tail properly, and could barely stay in the air. Covered in sweat, she was shivering, and there was only one outcome to her convulsive movements. The dragoness finally realized with horror that she would not fly so long, and a kiss with the ground was waiting for her. And so it happened. As she accelerated after her flight, she landed painfully back on the ground, plowing the ground with her face. It turned out that even such rare and majestic creatures as dragons need training and practice, and even they can't fly into the sky just like that. Watching all this, our flower and gecko didn't know how to react. Now their clearing was like a battlefield, and dust was rising from it in all directions. Wusun, however, realized that it was because it was her first time flying and that she lacked basic skills and would definitely learn everything in future. A crater was formed at the site of the fall, in the middle of which a bright golden flash had already reappeared, and Wusun asked the gecko to go and see if their little girl had been injured in the fall. However, the gecko had no sooner moved than the sound of crying filled their clearing. The little girl was crying as hard as she could and was already on her way to daddy. All the simple dreams of the poor girl had been shattered, and now she had to be calmed down immediately. Because now the little girl was running around the clearing with screams and crying, complaining to her daddy how much it hurts her. Our flower didn't even know what to do and how to calm his little girl, as he had no experience in such matters. Finally, he came to his senses and began to calm his daughter, asking her to stop crying and promising that he would help her to punish that nasty eagle. But all in due time, and she will have to wait a little. But she still did not calm down and continued to cry. Finally deciding that calming her down was useless, Wu soon decided to find out what kind of dragon she was. In remembering her appearance after her transformation, he assumed that she was similar to Yingluan from the classic of mountains and seas. Looking at her, he realized that she would grow up very quickly, so he needed to give her a name soon, because he couldn't call her his daughter all the time, and always refer to her that way. He had to think of a suitable name for her, and based on her dragon-like appearance, he decided to call her Yun. Now that she had a name, it was worth focusing on more important things. Remembering how birds train their chicks to fly and show them their own example, he wondered what he should do with his little girl. And while little Yun can't fly properly, she needs to train. But the question was how to help her, because he himself is just an ugly flower with a bad temper and a big mouth. Hell, he can't even move. How can he teach her how to fly if he can't show her anything? But first, he decided to ask her if she liked her new name Yun. To do so, he started from afar and solemnly announced to his daughter that she had grown up and it was time for her to have her own name. Then he asked her what she thought about daddy calling her Yun. She liked that name and it sounded great. Then she finally calmed down and went back to her dragon form to try again. And our flower finally figured out how to show her what to do too. To demonstrate, he came up with the idea of using his vines, weaving them together in such a way to show Yun what she was required to do. Dragoness was at first frightened by this demonstration, fearing that daddy had decided to spank his naughty daughter. But as it turned out, he waved only to show that from today, he is ready to help daughter to train and learn to fly. Today he decided to show her how to flap her wings and stay stable in flight. To do this, he asked her to come closer and stand on the so-called hand of her daddy. She obeyed and clumsily climbed onto his hand, trembling from exertion and effort. Our flower was amused by such an attempt, but he kept instructing her to work her wings more actively while flying and to try again right away. Yun obeyed, and literally after a few flaps, she soared into the sky quite swiftly. At first glance, it seemed that now she would definitely succeed, but it only seemed. Because in the air, the little one was not so good, and her too convulsive and detached movements were too clumsy for a long flight. Our flower cheered her up as best he could, and advised her to keep trying her best, and not to be afraid to look and fly forward. A painfully familiar memory of his mother teaching him how to ride a bicycle floated before Woosun's eyes. Now it was clear to him exactly what it reminded him of teaching a dragon to fly. Back then, his mom had advised him to keep his bike steady, keep his balance, and not be afraid to move forward. Now he understood the hard work his mother had done, and how he wished he had been grateful enough to her for it all. But unfortunately, there was nothing he could do. There was no turning back. He was brought out of his memories by the whistling sound of the dragon starting to fall. He shouted to her to be careful and hold on, but it was too late. The speed she had gained in the steep peak left her no chance to regain her balance, and with every second she was getting closer to the ground. Luckily, she was not that high up, and quite quickly her aerial journey ended in the nearest bushes where she fell with a thud. Woo-sun, worried for her life, immediately started shouting, asking In-yun if she was okay. The gecko didn't stand still either and ran to the crash site with all his legs. All of them were so worried that the child they cared so much about wouldn't get hurt from such a hard fall. Finally the bushes moved, but they moved as if there was some kind of struggle. Our flower continued to desperately ask her daughter In-yun what was going on and how was she, but there was no answer. Finally the bushes quieted down and In-yun came out of them holding a snake in her teeth. She rather boasted to her daddy to see what kind of snake she had caught. All bruised and scratched but very happy, she went back to our flower, who kept asking if she was hurt or bitten by that poisonous snake. But In-yun reassured him and told him not to worry, because she had done everything just as he had taught her, and had bitten the snake herself so that it could not do anything. Now Woo-sun was just shining with joy. At last his little girl had grown up enough to hunt snakes on her own, and now he and the gecko could breathe a sigh of relief, and not worry so much about how to feed her. This was the best news for him today, because he would finally be able to rest as he had dreamed. After a few days, In-yun had gotten completely used to her dragon form, and had learned to fly properly without landing on her face. And now she was constantly flying above Woo-sun, as if guarding his peace. Our flower watched her rapturously, marveling at how easily and effortlessly she flew now. Every day she was getting better and better at it. And now he even began to envy her, because he himself had no wings, and he would like to fly as freely, easily, and effortlessly as she did. The gecko also looked at all this with his mouth wide open, not hiding his admiration. Seeing that she was getting too far away from them, Woo-sun had already started waving for her to go back and not fly so far away. But she didn't pay any attention to him, and he thought that now that she had the vast expanse of the sky in front of her, she didn't care about the pathetic bugs like them on the ground. It seemed like that was the case, because soon In-yun disappeared from their sight, and only the blue sky with clouds was left above them. Now they had no words to express their disappointment at how they had been shamelessly abandoned. How dare she just fly off into the distance and not even thank them for everything? After 5 minutes, they finally came out of their daze, and Woo-sun awkwardly asked the gecko if he thought that she had flown to find her birth mother and now abandoned them forever. All he got in response was silence and the howling of the wind. And so another 20 minutes passed in silence. And our flower was only more convinced that his guesses were correct, since she still has not returned. He thought how quickly she'd grown up and left him. I guess parents feel the same way when their kids leave and go off to college. When he was almost completely desperate, a winged silhouette suddenly appeared in the sky in the distance. When they saw it, they glowed with happiness. And it was their little girl In-yun who had decided to return. But looking closer, all their joy faded away and was replaced by fear and tension. It wasn't their little girl at all, but that damn eagle. Our flower did not understand why he came back. There was nothing to steal. Did he really want to chew on the roots? But it was not like that. It seemed that the eagle was in a panic and was running away from someone. And the reason was right behind him and gradually approaching him. It was In-yun who was very serious and had actually flown specifically to find this eagle and pluck its feathers. Seeing her return, Woo-sun glowed with happiness and said that he had always known that little In-yun would never leave her old father alone. He also marveled at how vindictive she was, that she went looking for trouble with that eagle no matter what. Daddy's girl, well done. Taking advantage of the fact that the eagle was heading towards him, our hero was able to successfully make several accurate shots. The eagle was hit and stunned. Losing its feathers, it involuntarily began to fall to the ground. Wu Sun marveled at how clever his daughter was, for she had deliberately sent the brazen eagle towards them. It was not an easy opponent, so teamwork was necessary. Although the enemy was hit, it was not enough, because he had already had time to come to his senses and continue to run away. However, our hero did not plan to just let him go. In addition, he was eager to try out and practice a new skill. In the next instant, dozens of spiky seeds soared into the sky and headed towards the eagle at a great speed. Although our hero was not a sniper in his past life, but it seems that his skills were successfully trained. After all, it was very difficult to explain his accuracy in any other way. Once again receiving a hit for his crimes, the eagle screamed in pain. But as it turned out a moment later, the thorns were not the only, and not the worst of his problem. There was hardly anything scarier than a dragon's big clawed paw about to grab you by the head. Already in the next moment happened what seemed to be to end the eagle forever. Our little girl had successfully managed to grab him. But as it turned out, everything was not so simple. And the eagle turned out to be even more unpredictable opponent than they expected. Even as he fought the dragon, he wasn't about to give up. In the next instant, he bit Yin Yun's finger with its strong beak. Our little girl wasn't prepared for this. After all, she was just a small child. When she felt the pain, she immediately cried out painfully and let go of the bird. The eagle was surprised that his resistance had worked. Before he could recover from the shock, he began to fall to the ground, losing his feathers. In any other case, he would probably have recovered in time to take off. But this time everything was much more difficult, because at the bottom of the eagle was waiting for the barbed whips of our hero, which immediately rushed straight to him. Although our little girl did not manage to completely defeat the eagle, there was no point in worrying about it. After all, Daddy was there to solve his daughter's problems. The eagle, who at some point already believed in his salvation, at the sight of barbed whips, realized that he was a fool. After all, there was nothing scarier than an angry father. In the next instant, Wusun was already shouting fiercely that it was for daring to peck his daughter, stamping the eagle into the ground. From the force with which he hit it, and the explosion that occurred, it was safe to say that our hero was indeed very angry. As soon as the dust from the impact began to settle, our heroes saw the eagle lying motionless on the ground, which appeared to be dead. Since victory was theirs, Yin Yun rushed towards our flower with a bright smile. She was very happy that she was also able to contribute, and happily declared that she already can and knew how to hunt. Wusun himself was very proud and happy for his daughter. Patting her head, he said that she had really grown up and could hunt on her own. Receiving her daddy's praise, the little girl happily purred with pleasure. Since they had managed to defeat a difficult enemy, Wusun decided to celebrate. Hearing this, the gecko and the little dragoness were very happy, as it was the first time they were going to taste poultry meat, and it surely would be very delicious. Time flew by, and a whole month had passed since the eagle hunt. Every time he looked at how much and what kind of prey Yin Yun brought, Wusun could not help but be convinced that his daughter had grown a lot. She was now looks like a 10-year-old child, but as it turned out, she liked her dragon appearance better. In addition, now she went hunting every day, so the gecko no longer had to risk his life and be the bait. Bringing in her prey once again, the little girl proudly reported on her progress. Not holding back on the praise, the gecko and Wusun immediately praised her wholeheartedly. This praise was not unfounded, for the little one had really managed to accomplish a lot during this time. Her flying and hunting skills had greatly improved. And it was thanks to this that they were now able to eat nutritious meat every day, and not have to worry about having to eat nasty bugs. They finally received meat freedom. As Wusun handed Yin Yun another piece of meat, she worriedly asked why he didn't eat it himself. Our hero replied that this piece for her, and she shouldn't worry about it. As he was already full, he realized that his little girl continues to grow day by day. And in the near future, it will not be enough for her to eat only frogs, snakes, and birds that she hunts now. So now he tried to do everything on his part to make her stronger. But soon, he didn't need to worry about it anymore. Yin Yun herself began to feel that this meat was clearly not enough for her, so she soon began to hunt bigger prey. The first big catch was a large lynx, which his little dragoness didn't leave a chance for survival. Seeing such a large prey, Wu Sun was shocked and couldn't believe at first that she had managed to catch a real lynx. Realizing what a strong opponent his daughter was facing, our hero began to ask excitedly if she was hurt. Inyan proudly replied that he shouldn't worry about her, as she was already very strong and could take care of herself. But the surprises for Wu Sun didn't end there. For the next time, Inyan brought a hyena. Our hero was so surprised that he stared at her prey in silence for a few seconds with his eyes wide open. When he came to his senses, he immediately shouted to Inyan, saying that he had already told her not to catch such a large prey. In addition, hyenas were particularly dangerous. They lived in groups and were also very cunning. But what worried our hero even more was whether his little girl had any wounds. When she landed on the ground, the little dragoness told him not to worry about her, as she remembered everything he had taught her. She added that she had followed his teachings and attacked the hyena when it was alone. However, as soon as she came closer, our hero immediately noticed a bleeding claw wound on her leg. Like a real caring father, he immediately told her to come over so he could examine the wound. Examining the wound, he asked about what had happened. Inyan immediately began to reassure her caring daddy. She replied that it was just a small scratch she got when she was hunting. The hyena reacted too quickly and managed to bite her. After listening to her, Wu Sun replied that it is a minor injury, and wound is still bleeding. Although Inyan was a dragon, she was still very young and inexperienced. Therefore, our flower couldn't help but feel worried. Besides, when hunting large prey, she didn't always manage to kill it with a single strike. She had to grab it and throw it down from a height. This was a risk because the prey, even when clawed, could fight back and hurt her very badly. He immediately remembered how he himself had come home as a child with scratches from falls, and every time his mom was treated his wounds and told him to be careful. But he was a kid at the time, and he wanted to do what everyone else was doing and jump from the flower beds. His mom understood that. So instead of banning him from playing completely, she decided to teach him how to land properly. So that he could minimize the damage from the fall, she taught him that he should bend his legs, keep his body's center of gravity downward, and imagine himself as a spring when landing. Also, he should try to be flexible and supple. To which Wu Sun happily and enthusiastically replied that he got it and would follow this advice. Now, looking at the wound on his daughter's leg, he saw that it had already stopped bleeding and was beginning to heal. When he saw this, he was once again convinced that she was worthy of the title of mythical beast because she had the same strong healing properties. However, even that couldn't completely guarantee her safety. And so he definitely needed to teach her some methods of hunting and defense so that in difficult moments she could protect herself, just like his mother had taught him as a child. But the problem was that he didn't know how he could teach Inyan how to hunt. After all, he wasn't a flying dragon and couldn't show her how to hunt. And he didn't know how to hunt like a real adult dragon. At that moment, our hero realized that being a father was really hard task. However, even in the most difficult moments, our genius flower always found a way out. And this time was no exception, because soon a great idea came into his head. Even though Wu Sun didn't know how the dragons hunted here, he was an immigrant from another world, and he knew one thing. The safest way to launch an airstrike is to drop bombs and launch projectiles. The very next moment, he set about implementing his plan to train his little girl. Turning to the perplexed Inyan, he told her to bring a large rock with which she could fly freely. Gecko, on the other hand, he ordered to draw a large enough cross on the ground. Armed with the broken bone, the gecko successfully completed his task. Everything was ready for training. As soon as he finished, Wu Sun immediately shouted to him to run away, which he did in a hurry. A moment later, the majestic silhouette of a dragon appeared in the sky. After finding the right stone, Inyan returned back. Wu Sun immediately started giving her instructions on what to do. He explained that she had to aim first, then swoop down on the mark and throw the stone at it. Although it was not an easy task, Inyan had no choice. After all, in order to hunt safely, she needed these skills. Therefore, after concentrating and aiming, she released the stone. Once in the air, it flew towards the ground and hit the ground with a loud rumble. However, as expected, she failed to hit the cross for the first time. It was not surprising, as such precision required a lot of training. But unlike her daughter who thought it was a failure, Wu Sun was delighted and proud of her achievement, because even though it was her first throw, she almost hit the target. She was training much faster than he was, and the title of Lizard Outliner Master would definitely stay with him. But she couldn't stop there, so our hero said she should keep practicing. And first, she'd have to learn how to hit fixed targets, and then move on to moving targets. And when she can hit every target without a problem, she'll be considered a godly pitcher. Half a month later, a pack of hyenas snoozed peacefully in the desert landscape, unsuspecting of anything. And they were dozing for a reason. The nibbled remains of a carcass nearby told that they had had a big meal not long ago. One of the hyenas was yawning sweetly, and life suited it just fine, until the moment everything changed. And a whistling sound from above made the hyena raise its head up, its instincts telling it that it was in danger. But when it saw the boulder flying directly at it, the hyena was stunned and didn't understand what was happening or what to do. It is not every day that hyenas are hit in the head by boulders, and its reaction was expected. In a moment, the hyena was finished and only blood spattered from under the stone. The rest of the pack of hyenas immediately ran away raising dust. The unlucky one who had been hit on the head with a stone finally lost his spirit. His carcass was immediately grabbed by large white claws and dragged upwards. It was little Yun, who had grown a lot in the past half a month. Children always grow fast, but dragons were much faster. Right now, she was happy with how she had done. How epic she had crushed that hyena with a rock. All thanks to her daddy who had advised her on such a really effective hunting method. Using this stealthy attack method, Yun didn't have to worry about scaring the hyena pack early, and she could catch the hyena that she liked without worrying of being bitten. As she was heading back to her daddy with her prey, something on the ground caught her attention, and she wondered what it was. Just beneath her lay the scattered remains of two skeletons and their humble belongings that the wild beasts were not interested in, unlike their flesh. Amidst all of this, a sword with a golden hilt stood out in particular. Yun herself didn't quite understand what it was, but its shiny appearance did not leave her indifferent. As we all know, dragons love golden trinkets. Looking closer, she assumed it must be a human weapon, a sword her daddy had once told her about. She also remembered that her daddy was always playing with that broken arrow, and he would surely love it if she brought him something like that sword. So putting all her doubts aside, she decided to pick it up and give it to her daddy to make him happy. Swooping down, she grabbed the sword and flew home. Carrying the sword and the hyena carcass at the same time was not an easy task, but she managed, and the carcass fell not somewhere in the field, but right next to our flower, who immediately appreciated her good work. A direct hit to the head, instantly fatal. The once little Yun was now truly a god-like pitcher. This was especially impressive to the gecko, who couldn't wait to taste the hyena. Finally, the gigantic Yun figure itself landed not far away. And once again, Wu Sun couldn't stop marveling at how fast the little dragoness was growing. In less than 3 months, she had already become so big. And not just in dragon form, but in a human-like form as well. Enveloped in a golden glow, she began to transform into a young girl already. The light was bright and nothing could be seen. A glance at the form of this light was enough for our flower to make his eyes widen with embarrassment, but he was unable to look away.